Hello and welcome to the Best Self Series podcast. My name is Georgie from the Career Development Team, and this is the podcast where we delve into the 7 workshops from the Best Self Series and how you can embed what you learnt from each one to be the best version of yourself, both professionally and personally. Today's podcast is on the Change Happens workshop. We will look at why change is important, how we can use the change curve to move through change more quickly, understanding our brain's need for certainty, and lastly, how we can use the SCARF model to reduce the effects of change. So, why do we even need change? Change is such an important, necessary, and a good part of life because we learn and grow so much from all the changes that we go through. Situations changing often puts us outside our comfort zone, and although unfamiliar, it is this zone of discomfort where we achieve growth. In fact, change is necessary for our brain to create different neural pathways that allows us to have new beliefs, skills, and outcomes. If no new pathway is required because there's been no change, then our brain will simply not create one. Take a moment now and think about a change you've experienced before. What new skill did you acquire as a result? For example, if your team pivoted to using a new, more digital system, maybe you were able to advance your skill set in technology. Change also builds our resilience. When we experience life changes, we may come to realize our ability to adapt and to get through adversity. We might even build stronger connections with those around us as we support each other through times of change. Think about a change you went through that was really challenging. What resilience did you build as a result? Change is constantly happening around us and has allowed us to evolve as human beings. Having this understanding of why change is important can help you to work through times of change. You learn more about yourself, more about what you're capable of, and you become more resilient. Further to understanding why change is important, we might also like to self-reflect on where we sit along the change curve. To refresh your memory, we have multiple stages that we go through along the change curve. Firstly, we might experience excitement, or we might feel shock. Then we may go into a stage of denial, followed by frustration about the change. We may get to a point of depression, and then we start to transition into a bit of experimenting, a bit of negotiation. We then make a decision about whether we are going to get on board with the change. And finally, we come to the stage of success, where we have changed, and the change has then embedded into our life. It's important to note that when we experience change, even if we are excited, we're still experiencing a loss of how things used to be. People don't actually resist change, they resist the loss that comes with it. It's important to acknowledge that as it helps us to process that feeling, to then move more quickly towards the embedding part. It's also not as though you go through these stages one by one and follow an exact order. It can be something that changes from day to day, from moment to moment. One day you might feel excited, another day you might be feeling sad about the change. One day you might feel more accepting, and another day you might feel more in denial. So just knowing that everyone has this experience, that it is natural and it is normal and something that we can all go through, can help you to understand change and how you feel about changes in your life. It's also important to communicate these changes with your friends and family as well, so that they know how to support you and vice versa. Whatever change has come to mind when listening to this podcast so far, I want you to think about where you might be on the change curve. What is one thing you can do to support yourself through this stage? One idea of one thing you might be able to do is to find one or multiple things that are going to stay the same through this change, relating to your personal values or principles. This helps us to have something to anchor to when everything else feels like it's up in the air and we don't know what's going on and what the future is going to look like. In the Change Happens workshop, we explain the SCARF model, which stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. These are the 5 different domains of social behavior which affects our response to both threats and reward. An example might be that although the physical location of your work is changing, you still have the same autonomy over the way that you complete tasks. If you value autonomy, this will be something that you can anchor to and focus on in going through this change. We can also use the SCARF model to understand our reactions and also the reactions of other people to certain changes. For example, if your team is being split up or changing, and relatedness is one of your most important domains out of the 5, then you may feel quite a strong threat response to the change. Whereas someone else in your team that doesn't value relatedness as strongly might not be as impacted. It's important to note that these are the 5 core domains where we all experience a threat and a reward response, just to a varying degree. So, what about our brain and change? Well, we know that our brain doesn't like change. To put it simply, our brain doesn't like change. And the reason it doesn't is because our brain's main goal is to keep us alive. It does that by making predictions about what's going to keep us safe. And so when we have uncertainty in our lives, our brain isn't able to make those predictions. Our brain also doesn't like change because it's trying to conserve our energy. It wants to ensure that we have enough energy to survive and for all of our bodily functions to be able to still happen. So learning new things and getting used to new environments takes up a lot of energy. And it takes up a lot of energy of the prefrontal cortex part of our brain, which is the rational, logical thinking part of our brain. This part of our brain uses 75% of the brain's total energy. So when you are learning new things and have an environment that you're in, and when you're around new people, that part of our brain is engaged. And the brain is thinking, I don't like this. I just want to automate this because I want to save energy. And so we can support ourselves through change by constantly reminding ourselves and those around us that our brain simply doesn't like certainty because it wants to keep us alive. However, we know that in today's day and age, for most of us, there is no immediate threat happening constantly. We're not constantly at risk of a saber-toothed tiger going to attack us. And so we can remind ourselves of this, that we are okay, that we are able to change, and that we can engage the prefrontal cortex part of our brain to create these new neural pathways, and this will lead to our growth. Have a think about the story you might be telling yourself about the change that you're going through. Are you imagining the worst outcome happening? This is often what our brain seeks to do, to predict the worst outcome so that it can start to plan for that happening. If you think through it, maybe write down what are the real consequences of this change happening, you may start to realize that it isn't what your brain has painted. And this will give your brain and you a little bit more ease and a little bit more of a sense of certainty with the change that you're experiencing. That's the end of today's podcast episode, where we had a look at change, why it's important in our lives, how we can identify where we are along the change curve, our brain's need for certainty, what the SCARF model is, and how we can use it through times of change to understand our reaction. All of the reflection questions that were mentioned in today's podcast episode can be found in the SharePoint site of the Change Happens podcast. Make sure that you revisit these and take the time to write down your answers. This will bring awareness to your brain, as when we write things down, we are much more likely to remember it. Enjoy embedding what you learned from this workshop, and we hope to see you at one of our Best Self Series workshops again soon.